Okay, recently we've looked at a few different articles showing you that ancient hominids had lived on a lot longer than previously had been reported or really understood, to a weird point of overlapping. Way back when, if you would have went to archaeological school with me, the hot new thing was that it really didn't go one, then the next, then the next, leading like a Neanderthal, and then Cro-Magnon, and then Homo sapiens, and then Homo sapiens sapiens, I guess, us, which is strange they get to put that extra name on it. Now that's been pretty much shattered. In fact, all the way back to Cro-Magnon has been shown as being still extant today, but that's not what this is really about. But in those showings of once, we've showed sub-Saharans and their connections to this idea of archaic hominids living on, but also in the Australian Aborigines that are there. And an interesting article showing you that their very first ones that came onto the island were not the phenotype of the people that we think of as Aborigines, who we keep reporting have been there for 50,000 years. And they apparently came from the other islands, and the reason that they look so much a mix of somewhat the people of Irian Jaya is because of that effect. And during that one, I talked about how it seems like the edge of the Asian islands, if you will, and Oriental islands have this effect too. These islands I used to buy fish from. So let's take a look at this. For it shows something a little more close in time even than we're talking about in the other cases. Meet Bessie, a 7,200-year-old skeleton of a young female discovered in a cave on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. She is identified as a new type of ancient human called the Toaleans, after like Krakatoa and so on, who only died out 1,500 years ago. So basically 500 AD. Now her skeleton's between 7,200 and 7,300 years ago, which probably wouldn't seem too strange, except for the pictures that they keep giving of this. Before we go into this, I'll just go ahead and show this to you. I've taken them on my camera here. This one, it even shows you, is listed as the Toalean culture, right? But you can tell this was a hominid still. Extreme prognathism, simianus. What's strange about that is a lot of people connected actually in its skull form and recreation of what we're going to take a look at here as something that would be along this idea in Paranthropus, which is a step before Homo erectus in linear archaeology. Also, two articles that I looked at showed this picture, but another one showed another picture, and this is whenever they're talking about Denisovans. And so you can see this is one of the recreations that they did of Denisovans, and not necessarily the person at hand that they're talking about, for they're really talking about Denisovans. And I'm not sure where exactly this recreation comes from, but it's listed in the video that I got this picture off of, and same picture in another article, as being an example of an archaic human, or ancient human as it says here, called the Toaleans, who had lived on to a much more recent times, hidden on a portion of an island, which also makes me think of another recent video I did showing you that they had found supposedly this pygmy type people, these kids riding on a motorcycle, not too many islands hopping away from this point here. And it was somebody that was about 3.5 foot tall, naked pretty much, and took off and was real fast and then ditched it off into the side. A lot of people said that it had a tail and this, that, and the other, but if you catch it just right, really that's the flap for its wearing a loincloth type of idea. And the other time it twists and it gets that picture and everybody goes, see, it's a tail, is actually the stick that he's got in his hand. The motorcycle riders like wreck, and then they're like, what the hell was that? And they go after it. It's pretty neat. Showing you something like this, and of course that Floresian hobbit that we talked about, it's possible live on. And of course there's been a lot of romantic thoughts, especially on this island chain here in ancient times when people first knew about it, and this idea of the land of the lost. In fact, that led up to the King Kong idea and so on. And later we find Komodo Island, which had the Komodo dragons on it, which are really a giant monitor lizard. They're huge, the size of a crocodile or something, but, well, not that big, but they are really one of those things. Like I used to have a savanna and a Nile monitor lizard, which can get over 3 foot and have a big tail on them and everything. They're powerful creatures. But again, this thing would have been something that was huger. You've probably seen what I'm talking about. So the anomaly here is that something that basically looked like that picture that we were seeing in first was alive at 7,200 years ago, but they know they coexisted and lived on till only 500 AD. Female skeleton Bessie was found buried in a fetal position obscured by rocks. Really, they kind of have one on the other side of her head, and I've wondered in the archaeological paper that's supposed to have accompanied it, but none of the stuff I can find that goes along with it. Also, they have her genetics, and perhaps Egyptologist 7 can find a connection for that, but these people might have put something above her head and around onto it, and there's red ochre associated with it, but not processed, and still in rock form. So that seems kind of mimicry, but extremely archaic form of it in some way. Bessie was part of the Toalean culture, who were seafaring hunter-gatherers. So where do we get seafaring from? Well, they apparently made it to this place. And then the adaptation of fish and shellfish and so on, these people were putting around a little bit in an island form. In fact, if we have time at the end of it, I'll give a description of whenever I found out about these people and some of the mythologies of like Maui and the people that had gone through these islands, which is a different people than the Asians or Orientals, as we know. For Asia is something totally different. In fact, this person has an archaic Asian portion to its lineage, and that's what I really wonder out genetically on the papers. What are we talking about here? Are we talking Asian or Oriental? For people try to smear that nowadays, and you know, Anatolia is Asia Minor and all the way across. And at what point do we start saying, or especially in this time, is the Orient? Toaleans lived in the forests of South Sulawesi. It's that island that looks like a hand, but yet if you really look at it, it kind of looks like a turtle standing up, or a tortoise, and on its back would be a mountain or a volcano, and there's flames coming out of that are going forward of it. Of course, whenever I was first looking at this and their flag that they have and so on, someone mentioned that it looked like a AT-AT from Star Wars, and that it was smoking, and Luke's fixing to wrap up his legs and kaboom, so that might date this idea. But because also we were looking at some strange arrowhead points, which we'll see here shortly. She's a genetic fossil, they say, as she was part of a group with a unique ancestral history, well, especially to this point, and the mixture of the people that led into the island people that are there that are distinctly different from what we say is Oriental type people. Although Sulawesi has been taken over by Koreans now, it's not what it was up till recently. In fact, 500 AD, this form of archaic hominid was still living on. A 7,200-year-old skeleton of a young female discovered in the Indonesian island of Sulawesi has been identified as a new type of ancient human from a group called the Toaleans, who died out 1,500 years ago, and an international research team isolated DNA from the ancient Homo sapien, which they try to call that a Homo sapien. In one of the other articles, they tried to say modern human, which I find strange given the depictions and what we know. Who was found in a cave called Liang Panang, or Bat Cave, in the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. Christened Bessie, she was first known skeleton from an early foraging culture called the Toalean, seafaring hunter-gatherers who lived in Sulawesi from about 8,000 to 1,500 years ago. Bessie, who was found buried in a fetal position and partially covered by rocks, is somewhere between 17 and 18 years old at the time of death, researchers think. Stone tools and red ochre, iron-rich rock used to make pigments were found in her grave, although it's not processed and she's not doused with it the way that a lot of red ochre burials that we've talked about. Along with the bones of hunted wild animals. Bessie is a rare genetic fossil and shares about half her genetic makeup with present-day indigenous Australians and people in New Guinea, of Irian Jaya, or New Guinea as we know it, and the western Pacific Islands. So that people that stretched across, as I was talking about as far as Maui goes and things like that. This includes DNA inherited from now extinct species of humans called Denisovans, who everybody in that area has a blend of, for Denisovans had gotten over into that area and so on, and we found Denisovan Neanderthal hybrids and so on. And it leads to the idea of why everybody has Neanderthal, was that these Denisovan hybrids perhaps went on over and mixed in. But then there's another component in there, and of course when we talk about Asians, it's questionable as to what we're talking about, especially at this time. This includes DNA inherited from the now extinct species of humans called Denisovans, though, and the distant cousins of Neanderthals, whose fossils have only been found in Siberia and Tibet. Well, it's a little farther reaching than that, but somewhat. Its remains are unclear as to what happened to the Toalean culture and its people. But they lived on till a very modern time, and then suddenly seemed to disappear at the end of that, or get blended into another people. They're already going past them and on through the islands with a little bit more seafaring technology than themselves, and in the process getting wiped out. Or one other thought is that those people who was partially the Asian component of this person might have actually had diseases from chickens, fowls, domesticated animals, and so on, and running through the area with even some small contact, it obliterated them out. So the photo shows the jaw and teeth of this Bessie, who was found buried in a fetal position and partially covered by rocks in a cave called Liang Panang, or Bat Cave. No. It's really showing you the whole cranium there, for it's kind of been crushed down in kind of a twist, but easily they can take the little pieces, almost like you can see like it's pottery in here, and reconstruct the thing pretty easily. And the picture we were looking at is somebody that had a non-vaulted cranium. So I think they've already been able to figure that out. Apparently they tried to, but I can't discern this exactly unless I saw the paper, for these are just different news articles, and a lot of them feed off of each other, of course. The reason I chose this one is it showed some very good pictures of it, but the ones that it was missing is the offshoot Denisovan picture, which in a minute I'll show you another variation which I quite often use, as we said. But it shows you a lot of these pictures here of the burial itself and really where we're at in the world. So looking at the big globe here above Australia, and here's Irian Jaya, New Guinea, where we were talking about before, but there's a stretch of islands that are here and a band that runs up through here, and above it this hand type shape that's right here at the point of my finger going on, and then next to it another island set that leads up in. Well, that blown up over here is the hand that they call it here, and I guess you can kind of see it with its legs and a hump on its back, and it's a big walking tortoise with double long legs. But it's got a volcano on its back and smoke's coming out. Or you could probably see the tauntaun and the idea that goes, or adat, and the thing that goes on with that. So we've talked about this place back and forth with a whole lot of things before we were discerning how people had changed and gone through, a kind of preemptive cursor to the Australian form, but this Wallace line that runs through here. And it's a declamation where they know whenever the sea level was a lot lower during the last ice age, at least 10,500 years ago, and then on past. Really, at like 22,000 years ago, it was pretty much its maximum and gave people their maximum breath, along with animals and so on. There's a reason, though, that there's a declamation to where there's tigers in here, and it stops at a certain point and making it across because that Wallace line cuts things off. And it's flora and fauna, so it's plants and animals. And there's a kind of cutoff that's there that never rebounded back. Well, of course it never did because it's been flooded over since then, but a lot of these islands were connected, and we'll take a look at a picture of that in a little bit. Archaeologists affectionately dubbed her Bessie in a nod to a custom among royal families of the area, bestowing this nickname on newly born princesses before they were formally named. So that sounds somewhat appropriate, although they aren't connected really. Selena Karloff, doctor's candidate at Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History and lead author of the study, that's what I need to look up. I should do that and then start this over after I've discussed that a whole lot more, but there might be a part 2 here. Isolated DNA from petrous bone of the skull. It was a major challenge as the remains had been strongly degraded by the tropical climate, she said. So this petrous bone is a bone up in the skull, and from what I understand, the way it is made, it's not porous like the other bones and even have vesicles running through it pretty much. So it's sealed and it's impenetrable pretty much by bacteria going in or out or anything. And this is the place, in this special place, that they've been able to find DNA in a lot of older mummies and so on, and that's where they got it from Cro-Magnon man and a lot of these old archaic sites, because it's pretty much gone out of everything by the point they're able to look at it. But then the new techniques that they have coming out really give a chance to start piecing these pieces together and giving you at least parts of signatures. And of course, you don't have to listen to the whole song. Wow. You don't have to listen to the whole song to recognize it. So in a lot of these cases, but not all, they're going to be able to look at a portion of this DNA if they ever get little sections of it like I'm talking about, and in the process be able to discern the fact of where this actually comes from and who it's connected to, and if they get enough out of it that are also showing other connectives, they can say, well, it's kind of this and that. It'd be hard to get the exact percentage unless you were able to get the full idea out of it, but they're getting better and better at it. It's pretty amazing what they've been able to do already, isn't it? So through radiocarbon dating, the team was able to determine the age of Bessie's remains to be between 7,300 to 7,200 years old, as I said earlier, in the Toalean culture, of which Bessie was part of, has only been found in a relatively small area in Sulawesi's southern peninsula. We'll show you which part of the leg of that at or turtle or hand we'd be looking at. Sulawesi is the world's 11th largest island and part of a geographical transition zone called the Wallachia or Wallace Line, and one of the Wallace Islands itself. The new study, published in the latest edition of Nature, marks the first time ancient human DNA has been found and reported from Wallachia, or directly on that Wallace line. Bessie is also the first relatively complete skeleton to be found alongside securely dated artifacts from the Toaleans, according to study co-lead Professor Adam Brum at Griffith University, Queensland, Australia. You see this picture here in the middle under related articles, and this picture right here is going to show you in that article they're talking about Denisovans instead of the indigenous Philippines, but they have a highest level of Denisovans, and so whenever they go off rambling about Denisovans, they show you this picture. Or in that other article, they had shown the one that I showed you before, but that in more of a rounded face type look, where this one almost has a teardrop type shape. These are their special arrowheads, which are somewhat unique. And I remember seeing them in a book that was all about arrowheads and weaponry, and a whole mix of it. And it gave me the idea that they had come up with this from shells, because I have seen worn away shells to where it said eroded away, and half of it's gone, and it pretty much looks a lot like these. The only problem is the bottom side of the shell's still there and it's eroded away, and the inside of it's all hollow with all of its hollows that are in it. And if you notice looking at these, a lot of them, most of them, if not all of them, are lopsided in a way. And this flint mapping the back of it is not necessarily unique, but it is somewhat different than the common form of it, along with the napping type effect that goes on here where they chip away at the side of it, but it's not flaking, causing a thin blade on it. It's actually a jagged effect, which we find in other people making harpoon type points. Some of these are pretty small too, and this would be great for killing birds and things along that, and smaller animals, which would have been on the island here. So variations on a theme that you see that, they're known as Maros points. And they're along with these people in this area, about 8,000 years old. They're considered to be typical of the Toalean techno-complex developed by the people living in the south of the island of Sulawesi. Toaleans were early hunter-gatherers who lived in a secluded existence in the forest of South Sulawesi from around 8,000 years ago until 1,500 years ago, hunting wild pigs and collecting edible shellfish from rivers. So they only can find them from that date. You are going to find a few discrepancies here, like whenever they tried to call them modern humans and then use that picture and then tell you they're archaic throwbacks, but halfway got a hybrid admix type thing going on from people we recognize are part of their genetics, showing you that they've got a variation on a theme of that, leading to a different form, what we call Orientals, and the people very much north of here, in Japan and China and so on. Among these objects manufactured by the people of the Toalean culture are the characteristic stone arrowheads known as Maros points collected by researchers. Toalean artifacts have also been found in one small part of Sulawesi, encompassing about 6% of the total land area of the island. So they were self-trapped in an insular idea, or you think insular dwarfism, but they don't find them ranging out very much, and it could be that the other people that were around during this time there were at this time, were kind of like in Gilligan's Island too, and there was a little bit of a stay off from these people, and perhaps that leads on to a modern day of these same people saying that they saw something, like I said with that motorcycle video, or if you've watched the Grant, whenever he goes around all these places and says, hey, well, there's mythology about all these places, let's see if any of it's true. Some of it says there's still dinosaurs around and things like that, but other ones are of people or Bigfoot type creatures and so on, which, looking at it now, I mean, always, just to be honest and cut forward right here, I've always thought of that to be about impossible. I mean, I could see how they could live on longer than you would think, because, you know, that kind of changed whenever I was in school. But now finding out things like this, and then people that maybe have been something that's like Paranthropus that was living up to 500 years ago, starts to really geek you on the idea of, well, then they're what? Well, that leads to all kinds of slight possibilities here. Not that I'm giving full credence to it, but all of a sudden, what? If you know what I'm saying. So this suggests that this isolated past culture had limited contact with other early Sulawesi communities or people in nearby islands, existing for thousands of years in isolation, said a study co-author Agdiagas Octavania, a researcher at Pusat Penelitian Archaeological Nasional, Indonesia's National Archaeological Research Institute. The research team has found no evidence that the group of Bessie belonged to left descendants among today's population in Wallachia. Well, today's modern population is pretty much been driven up by Taiwan like 3,500 years ago, but it also remains unclear what happened to the Toalean culture and its people. Well, people who lived in Sulawesi today seem to largely descend from Neolithic farmers or Australasians who arrived from the region from Taiwan some 3,500 years ago. So it's not really Taiwanese people, but Taiwan used to have these type people on it. Is that what we're getting here? And they migrated here, and then now, if I'm not mistaken, Sulawesi is still kind of been taken over by Taiwan type people, or maybe that was stated in a different way in that other paper. Whenever I talk to the divers and things that I used to get fish from, they speak in an Indonesian type accent that you can easily see, and in fact you could tell the difference between their American or English and the person around Bali, because the person in Bali seemed like it was a mix of that islander and almost like an India type thing a little bit, whereas these people had something else going on. So the scientists do note, however, that more extensive genomic sampling of Sulawesi's diverse population could reveal evidence for genetic legacy of the Toaleans. So it kind of contradicts itself right there. It's strange, but it seems to me, because this article here is taken from 3 or 4 of the other articles and kind of jumbled it through here, you see it actually straightforward contradicting itself with it being an archaic, or is it a modern human? Is it Homo sapiens, or is it, wow, the recreation there looks so much like Lucy and so much closer to that than even the forms of Homo erectus that we know of that existed all through this area, and its variations, which are wild, which we talked about before. So the discovery of Bessie and the implications of her genetic ancestry show just how little we understand about early human story in our region and in that region, and how much more there is left to uncover, Professor Brum said. Like the genome of the indigenous inhabitants of New Guinea and Australia, Bessie's genome contained traces of Denisovan DNA. And of course, that shows up all the way through there, and the mountains of Tibet and the people that lived all through there. And it really seems to be in a slight Eskimo type component of people that are up there. But those people were dissected a bit by the Orientals that we know about. Here's the burial here, and so it's what I was saying. There were some rocks beside her head and so on going here. So her head's right here, and then there's rocks here, so they're placed in a way that maybe hoping that she didn't get crushed. Well, that picture we were looking at before, basically they moved this rock right here, and after they lifted the rock, somebody got over here and took a picture right of the jaw right there. And as you can see, the head, which used to be around here, has kind of been laid flat there. Didn't quite work. Perhaps if they had been more advanced about the technique here, they could have put a few more rocks around her head, and then it wouldn't have necessarily happened. But looking at the pit in some of the other pictures, I don't know exactly how deep they are, but it looks like you can see 5, 6, 8 foot that they are down on there, and that amount of compression would have done a whole lot of damage to it. So that's how it was found in that bat cave. Oh, cool side note here. This bat cave here, they found it, and they wanted to utilize it in a way, and they were going to build a water park right near there. And so the idea was is they could have this walk over, drive through, set up kind of complex where they broke into the back of this cave and utilized it as part of the water park. And so the people went to do excavation there, found a few things, went a little deeper, and whoop, bing, what's this? Kept digging, and here we go. The Denisovans are an extinct group of archaic humans known primarily from finds in Siberia and Tibet. The fact that their genes are found in the hunter-gatherers of Lan Penang reports earlier about this, that Denisovans occupied a far larger geographical area, said study author Professor Johannes Krauss of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, which we've talked about quite frequently here. So, and him with his base of knowledge here kind of shows you that too. So not only Denisovans, but Denisovans got down there, and then hybrids of Denisovans with apparently hominids. And no one's knowing exactly what they looked like before that. We really have a very little idea of what Denisovans would look like from a couple of finger bones and a part of a jaw. I mean, it's kind of silly, but it's possible Denisovans and the first modern humans, ancestors of today's indigenous Australians and Papua New Guineans, which again they were modern, bred in Wallacea. So it's possible that they got this as hybridization there, and then those came through. Why is that important in all what we're talking about? Because later people like that came in, but there was already a earlier hominid type form that was in Australia from 50,000 years ago that apparently were seafaring, as we're talking about here. These ancestors likely entered Wallacea some 65,000 years ago after spreading from Eurasia towards Oceania. So a hybrid did happen there as they got pushed more towards the ends of the known earth, if you will, and somehow squished out and went on down through those islands. And whenever the last ice age ended, they were pretty much trapped there. But given the opportunity back when, once they got to that haven area, they stayed. Here's one view of a point into this that was going to be, again, fixed up differently and laid out. And they're out here out front of it, but the dig is down inside of it 10, 12, 15 more foot here. But also it's definitely known for its bats, that there are crevices up inside there, and thousands of bats go through there. Bat cave. No, 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 no. So you can see this pit they're in right here, and the overhangs over them now in this idea. And you can see how deep he's standing up, and I don't know if you want to say he's 5.5 foot tall. They're that deep there, but also in the dig you can see there's a deeper square that goes in. The Wallace Islands were stepping stones in this journey prior to the reaching Oceania around 50,000 years ago, and the geographic distribution of Denisovans and modern humans may have overlapped in the Wallacea region, said co-author Professor Cosmo Poth of the Schneckenberg Center for Human Evolution and Paleoenvironment at the University of Tübingen, Germany. It may well be that the key place where Denisova people and the ancestors of indigenous Australians and Papua New Guineans inbred. So this is the idea that Johannes Krauss talked about. Now you can see they're down in this pit from somebody taking a picture right above, but somebody standing up, and then where they're down at doing this. Analysis also revealed something unexpected in the genome of Bessie, a deep ancestral signature from an early modern human population of Asian origin. So she'd already been admixed from a more archaic hominid by a already modern human in Asian origin. Now I wonder exactly what that means as far as Asian refers to. This group did not intermix with the predecessors of Aboriginal Australians and Papuans, suggesting it may have entered the region after the initial peopling the supercontinent known as Sahul. So a lot of people call it Mu or whatever, but yet when we look at this, there's a little bit of contradiction here. So it says this is the place where they all mixed in and then became them and so on, but yet right down here just after picture it says it did not intermix with the people that were the predecessors. You see that? It's unlikely that we will know much about the identity of these early ancestors of Toaleans until more ancient human DNA samples are available from Wallacea area in Indonesia, as senior author Professor whatever said, but it would now appear that the population history of genetic diversity of early humans in the region were more complex than previously supposed. Have we not heard that exact same phrase or variation of about 20 times here recently? Toalean foragers were the earliest inhabitants of Sahul and the supercontinent that emerged during the Ice Age when global sea levels fell and were at its lowest, which exposed a land bridge between Australia and New Guinea. To reach Sahul, these pioneering humans made ocean crossings through Wallacea, but little about their journey is known. So looking here, you can see the area that's more land now. And this is back at the last ice age, and more land that's around it. The white that's here is the current landmass with it all flooded up here. And whenever we were in the depth of the last ice age, all of this was exposed. There was a little freshwater inner lake right here, where we can also see that this is just totally connected. And we can see this is all connected, and some of these islands were connected, and it's not very far at all across here, which this is Sulawesi, and jumpable across here too if it's jumpable here. But the reason they call them seafaring is they had to make that jump. And it looks so small to us, but I believe the estimate was something like 16 kilometers. So it would have been a situation where they might have been able to see the island from there, maybe, and especially like clouds growing up from that island, and then knowing that that's the effect. Maybe somebody went out fishing halfway in between and could see it, so on. I mean, a lot of ideas can come out. But then once they made it to one, they'd have to make it across, and a lot of them to make it to the secondary area over here and down through, and that Wallace line cuts through this point. So, ancestors of Bessie were among the first modern humans, what? to reach Wallacea, but instead of island hopping, first modern admixed humans or archaic humans with modern admix? But instead of island hopping eastward to Sahul, they must have just remained in Sulawesi. If so, they may have been forebears of Bessie, who created the very old cave paintings recently found in South Sulawesi, recently reported by Griffith University researchers. This rock art dates to at least 45,000 years ago and includes what may be the earliest known human representations of animals. Thought about doing a video about that, and then the connective of this, and then this thing popped up for my interest in Sulawesi and tag. That's where that comes from. But I don't know how you can try to connect these people 45,500 years ago to these people that you can only date to roughly 8,000 or 7,300 years ago up to a modern time, which is the anomaly here. But perhaps that Asian derivative, something that they're talking about there, which is sounding more like a modern human that admixed into him, probably made it all the way to this point. What did they do after that? I don't know. We don't find much contact or anything past that point, so perhaps not. But maybe that admix happened a little more over here than back over there, like they're trying to infer. For now, all of a sudden, we're giving it a 45,000 year swell here. Sulawesi is one of a group of islands known as the Wallacean Islands, where there's been a historical lack of investment in conservation, according to critical ecosystem parchment. So, Denisovans, and they go roughly into this, and they were early humans. They're found in a cave in the Altai Mountains in Siberia. We've talked about this much before, so probably shouldn't have to go. But scientists are able to analyze DNA from a tooth and a finger bone, and so from that they realize that they're different. But it's described as nothing but sensational, because they did find that thing that was different about these slight people. We've also found something different about sub-Saharans, which have much more than these people here of an archaic unknown ghost species, because we're not sure of who or what it is. In this case, we were able to find Denisovans. One day we might find the hominid that makes up their portion here too, but something quite different. How widespread were they? Well, it seems like this is going to shut down on me. Because my pointer keeps blinking on and off, and now it's gone. But these DNA from these early humans has been found in the genomes of modern humans over a wide area of ages, suggesting that they once covered a vast range, or that the people that now live in Asia had once interbred with these people. And I guess the amount that's left over would say how much more integration they had in it. Say like Neanderthals looks like slight integration happened a few times, leaving you 2%, maybe 4%. Over in Asia it gets up to 6%. So there's a larger portion there too, but then that Denisovan amounts to ping-pongs around a little bit and gets a different number also. So let me know what you think downstairs, but basically, they're going and on here talking about Denisovans, and in doing so, they leave us with the idea of, well, now hold on, that's a small portion of these people's DNA too, isn't it? So why is it you go on? Well, I guess it's the only ones we know about, and we really only know about that from a finger bone and so on. Suddenly, it seems like we know a whole lot more about these Sulawesi Toalean people than we do even about Denisovans, right? Sure are closer to a modern time. Yeah, we're going to do a part 2. It's going to be in your top left-hand corner. I'm going to go ahead and finish off this article after I reload it here. We'll see you there in a moment. Let me know what you think downstairs before you go. Pause it and do it. Peace.